Today I decided to give you guys a ranking of the Godfather films. This is a series of films that started in 1972 and lasted all the way up until the 90s. It's a pretty interesting series of crime films that were directed by Francis Ford Coppola. The series stars Marlon Brando as the Godfather, as well as Al Pacino. There's also Talia Shire, James Caan, Robert Duvall, just an all-star studded cast, and it was one of the most magnificent films of the 70s. So without further ado, I figure I'd give you guys my ranking from worst to best. Coming in at 4th place is The Godfather Part 3. Released in 1990, this was essentially the end of the Godfather saga, at least as far as the films are concerned. And it's a relatively decent entry that I think gets a lot more hate than it deserves. The third Godfather film was really nothing special compared to the first two, but it was a decent film that was actually nominated for Best Picture. It's a bit grander in scale than the first two films, at least it was attempting to be. It lacks some of the subtlety and overall drama of the first two films. The film actually stars Sofia Coppola as Michael Corleone's daughter, and she does an okay job. Some people didn't like her in the movie, and Sofia is much better known for her directing. But I think she does an okay job. And overall, it's just a decent story about Michael more or less giving up the crime life, ultimately letting his nephew take over. It's an okay film, and I think that it could have been better, but I don't think it's a bad movie, and it doesn't deserve some of the hate that it gets. Coming in 3rd place is The Godfather, Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone. This essentially is just a director's cut of the third film, but it's actually a pretty good improvement. I was actually kind of impressed with the film because the pacing is a lot better. They move certain scenes around to make them make more sense narratively. They do add in a few small scenes, nothing crazy, but some stuff here and there that we missed before that does make the plot more coherent. And they actually trimmed down the movie some. I believe it's actually a little bit shorter this time around. This is more or less the definitive version of 3, and I still rather enjoy it. It has a good cast, it has a good story. It's not up to par with the first two films, but all in all, it does work as a decent 90s crime thriller. I think Andy Garcia does a good job as the up-and-coming Godfather and Sonny's illegitimate child. But ultimately, I think the film might have been released just too late to be accepted by the fan base. I think if it had been released in the 80s, it probably would have been more of a hit, but as it stands, it is a decent movie. The Death of Michael Corleone is the definitive version of that movie. If you like Godfather 3, I very much recommend this version of it. Coming in at number 2 is The Godfather Part 2. Released in 1974, this sequel to the original film continues the story of the Corleones and shows Michael in his position of power. But the great thing about this film is that it's also a prequel to the original movie. It actually features Robert De Niro in one of his first roles, the young Vito Corleone at the turn of the century, and shows his rise to power. It's actually the best part of the movie, and I kind of wish the entire film was just the prequel part. Don't get me wrong, the part with Michael in the 1950s is not bad, but it's not nearly as good as the stuff with his younger father. I kind of wish this was just a prequel. And they probably could have saved the stuff with Michael and just made a third film, even back in the day. I still like the stuff with Michael, but it just pales in comparison to the other half of this movie. There's even something of a cut that I've heard about, but I haven't seen, where they take the prequel segments of this movie and add them in with the entire first movie. If I could see that cut, I think it would be the definitive version of Godfather, because I think the prequel stuff is probably the best thing that Godfather has ever done. Whereas the more modern day or 1950s stuff is a little bit underwhelming in comparison. It's still good, mind you. I do like the whole thing with Michael having to go to court and trying to keep the family together while also being the Godfather, but it's just not as interesting as Father's backstory. Ultimately, a great film, and if it was all about young Vito, might be my favorite. But as it stands, it's still amazing, and I highly recommend it. But you can't beat the classic 1972's The Godfather. My absolute favorite film of the franchise. This is just an amazing movie. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola in 1972, this film will pretty much change cinema and really put the mob genre back on the map. There had been other mob movies in like the 30s and 40s that were just kind of, well, cheesy by comparison. But this one here really does up the ante, and I don't think it's ever been topped. Some people might prefer like Goodfellas or Casino, but to me, The Godfather is where it's at. It's just an amazing film that ultimately is about family. It shows this crime family, the Corleones, in New York City. They try to live their lives and defend their territory and turf from other ruthless gangsters and mob members, and ultimately it just leads to a great story. It spans from New York City all the way to Italy. The cinematography is amazing. The music is iconic, especially the score. The trumpet score is just one of the best things that you're ever going to hear. Truly a work of art, and it's a damn masterpiece. Without a doubt, there are some great films from this era, and the 1970s really is my favorite era of film, and The Godfather is one of the reasons why. Just really can't be topped, and I think it's the best mob movie ever made. That's my list. This is an amazing franchise that I've literally owned on VHS, Blu-ray, and I'm slowly converting to the 4Ks, and it's one that is just superb in its execution. And thankfully, there actually were some video games that went along with this franchise, including one of my favorite games ever, The Godfather. It was released on PS3, PS2, 360, Xbox, Wii, and even PSP. And the Wii version is actually my favorite version of the game, the Black Hand Edition. Have yourself a Wii or a Wii U, I highly recommend getting this version. But if not, the second best would have to be the Dawn's Edition on PS3. What's great is the second film also had a video game just entitled The Godfather 2, as opposed to The Godfather Part 2. Both really good, but this one's a little bit of a step down from the first. All in all, just an amazing film series, and one that I've always loved. If you haven't seen them, I recommend all of them, even the third film. But if you're a little weary about the third one, I recommend watching the director's cut. It's different enough to where you can really enjoy it. If you haven't seen the third film, I do recommend watching the director's cut. All in all, you're going to have a good time if you've never seen the series. And for those of you who have seen the series, well, you already know what I'm talking about. I thank you all for watching. Leave your list down below if you'd like, and peace out.